Uh-oh.
So we're back on the build, working on the Marshmello the One. As always, brought to you by Three Monkeys Solderless. Thought I was gonna miss that. Brought to you by Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedal board and your car stereo, or your turntable, or your component audio system. Got the 1/4 inch, the DC, and the RCA. Check us out, the link below. All right, so where we last left off, chassis was in this condition right here. And just making some beeps for fun. Just wanted to set the timer. I forgot to set the timer. So yeah, where we last left off, chassis was in this here condition. Right, we've mounted the octal novel sockets, the filter capacitors, and what is to do now, what I like to do now is to mount the transformers, the power output choke. So let's start with that. I'm going to start with some strain relief, or grommet protection rather. Some rubber grommets. Not strain relief, really. So we have some big grommets, and we have a small grommet for here. So there's a lot of controversy about whether you need grommets or not, but we're using them. You know, generally speaking, the amplifier is not vibrating all the time where it could possibly create a problem with sawing through the, gotta grab the little tool here, sawing through the insulation of the wire itself. If it were an airplane or a car or a piece of machinery that's constantly vibrating, I would say that there's a chance. And yeah, you can get a little vibration when your amp is sitting on top of a 412 cabinet, but it definitely ain't doing that. So my opinion is that it's overkill, but you know, it looks nice, and why not, right? When you're trying to make something last forever and ever and ever, this is sort of more insurance, which is good. So we're just kind of sticking these things through. Sometimes they go in easy, sometimes they're a giant pain in the butt, like this one's starting to become, so you need a little tool to kind of make sure that they're in there nice. There we go. Putting these ones in. I think sometimes they're just, some of them are a little bit, seem to be harder material than the other, and they're all from the same batch, but for some reason or another, sometimes one seems to have a little more pliability to it. Probably sticking these in a glass of hot water before you do it would probably make this go easier, but you know, it's not that bad. See, this one's being a little bit of an annoying grommet. There we go. All right, so we have our grommets in. So now let's grab the transformers. Now the way I like to do this is, again, it's going to be a little bit off screen. So I'll kind of show you. So it's sort of a balancing act. So we have our power transformer, right? Put that here. We have our choke. And then we have our output transformer. Right? So what I like to do is sort of counterbalance the thing so I can hang it off the edge of the bench here and then work from the top and underneath. So I'll sort of have my screwdriver on the top and the nut driver on the bottom and attach the transformers while it's hanging off the bench. So you can't really see what's off the bench, so you'll have to take my word for it that that's what's going on. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of just get these wires kind of separated and make sure they're all kind of in a good place, right? And then we're going to orient them properly. So I have the primary towards the front of the chassis and the secondary towards the back. So I'm balancing it on the capacitors while they kind of feed the wires partially through the grommet. So this can be a little bit of a pain in the butt at times too. So now I'm going to start to hang the whole thing off of the edge of the bench, like so, and then I can feed the wires through more and pull them through the opposite side, get them all nice and neat. And if you're not careful, you can often pull the grommet through with the wires, which would mean that you have to kind of, in a sense, start all over again by pulling out the wires and reinserting the grommet. So that could be a pain in the butt. So I'd recommend you don't do that. So I'm slowly working the wires through the hole till the transformer gets seated down. There we go. Success. Okay, now I'm going to use our screws to do the mounting. A couple too many there, but that's all right. Get out. There we go. That's the right amount there. Okay. Now, these screws are really nice too. I really like these guys. So they're called a panhead, kind of like the motorcycle, but they have a very wide top to them, which makes for a nice kind of secure connection with these transformers. And they're made of stainless, high-grade stainless, so they're going to not rust or create problems, and they're extraordinarily strong, so you're not going to get a failure there. So now I'm using the screw from underneath, or rather the nut going underneath the chassis, and just hand threading the nut on to start at all four corners. There we go. Now we're going to use our nut driver and screwdriver kind of tighten them up. And I go kind of diagonally. I'll do one at a time, obviously. Okay, so now the power transformer is mounted. So I'm going to tuck my wires up and we can take these two transformers off real quick. And then I'll turn it around like so. And now I can mount the output transformer. Oh, okay, so the output transformer gets mounted with the second primary side rather closer to the power transformer side of the chassis. And I can balance my transformer there while I thread the secondary through. There we go. Got to get the primary side through all the way. Now it's a good idea always too to check to make sure that all your wires are through and not kind of, sometimes they'll get scrunched underneath the transformer and you won't notice it. And then when it comes time to tighten your transformer down, you're going to pinch your wire under the transformer. And that's not going to be good, because you're going to wreck your wire and you're going to need to then replace that lead. Or worse is you're not going to realize that you did it until you test the amplifier. In which case then you got a lot of work. Taking out the transformer again. Hoping everything survived the oversight. I'm kind of also balancing the ends of the chassis on my belt while I'm doing this as well, because you don't want this to fall on your foot or the floor. There we go. Grab our tools. Go. Okay, so we have the 2 of the 3 transformers mounted into the chassis. Now we can do the final one, which is the choke. Grab our screws and nuts. This one takes a little bit more trick, as there's a lot of stuff in the way under the chassis at this point in the build, and you can't really see what you're doing, so you kind of just got to use your own feel to get it. So sometimes it takes a couple of seconds longer than the other when you mistake one screw for another. Yeah, I knew I had the wrong nut driver. Much better with the correct nut driver. And there we have it. Okay, so we have our transformers are all mounted here. So all of our hardware for the top of the chassis and components are mounted. And now we're ready to turn it over. And we have our spaghetti factory. Gonna use a little bit of Loctite on these. Extra protection. There we go. So we are good to go. So at this point now, I'm actually going to start some of the wiring. So I'm going to get in frame. Rather, I'm going to get my solder gun fired up. Get out my solder and start. So I'm going to start by just kind of bending out the octal sockets tabs to make room. And then I'll do everything in a particular order as well. Let me grab my tools. What I like to do is start with the very first thing would be doing the heaters and run a heater to the first tube. And then after I run just that, ground the heaters, center tap reference, right? Let me see if that's in, yep, that's sort of in frame. Let me move it over a little bit. Ground the center tap of the heaters and then run that to the first preamp or power tube. And then after that, what I'm gonna do is start putting in the ground references for the different controls on the back to these tabs here that I want grounded there. And then I'll put in our 1 ohm, 1 watt, sort of like bias resistors. So we're going to start with grounding the center tap for the heaters with this big guy right here. So I'm going to make sure that it's nice there. And I'm just going to pull off. As again, don't cut. Sort of pull apart the insulation. So we're going to pre-tin it. And we're going to go ahead and put it through this solder tab right here. That's good right there. I'm going to neaten it up. Now we're going to go ahead and twist the heaters. I'm going to run them just around this can capacitor here and get them where they need to be for connection to the octal socket. Just tinning the blade off a little bit to get into I'm going to apply a little heat, and then this will just kind of push through. There we go. And then solder it in place. There we go. Right about there is where I want that one. So it's a definite snug fit. Okay, now we're going to apply a little bit of solder to the tip here. And then we should be able to just push it through like that. Call that a kind of solder lube. Gonna get it into a good position. Just about like that. And then we can go ahead and make the joint correct. There we go. I think we can push this one through a little bit more. Might be good. There we go. Just gonna reflow that joint. Make sure those look good. And they do, and now I can just snip off a little bit of the excess. And that looks very good. Okay. There we go. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna grab some wire. Next thing I'm gonna do is do some grounds connections, get those ready to go. All right, so we're going to, well, I'll start down on this end, and then I can kind of show you, bend this up a little bit, what we're gonna do here. So we'll use the bottom ones for the, as usual, for the 1 ohm. So let's do those first. So I'm gonna go ahead and twist these socket tabs so they kind of face each other. Then I'm gonna grab one of the resistors, one of these 1 ohm resistors. All right, so then I'm going to bend it down like this. Going to kind of get it through. And I'm going to put the lead through there. And that's sort of what it's going to look like. So I can go ahead and solder onto here. Cut off the excess, and then I can fold this other lead around, trim off its excess, pinch it. I could solder it. It's good right there. Now from that point I can add a ground point, or a lead for a ground point. So I'm just kind of going to loop it through and pinch. Not too hard so as to, you know, maul the wire. Just kind of fold it over. Make sure it's a good mechanical connection. And then solder it for the good electrical mechanical connection. Good solder connection. Now this is going to be going for the ground for the loop. So I'm just going to give myself a little extra here. So I'm just going to continue down the line doing each one of these things. No, all right. So I think this would be a good point to pause, and then I can just kind of keep going through all of these ground points, and then we'll come back to the next operation. All right, so we'll be right back. All right, so we got all our little 1 ohm resistors in and our ground points for the different functions. And at this point, what I usually like to do is do the secondary on the output transformer. So I'm going to grab some of these zip ties and I'm going to start getting that done. So try to get it like this. So it's nice and neat. All right, so now we have our choke, our 2 plate leads, and our center tap connection. So I'm going to bring this down around like here, which is good. And then I'm going to the white is the center tap and the thin red is the choke. So those are gonna go over to the fuse. So we're gonna kind of put them to the side like that. And the brown lead will go under all of that to this side of the push-pull. So I'm gonna get it down to the corner, and then I'm gonna bring it up like that. Cut off the measured lengths with my finger. Keep this, so we're going to need it. Strip some of the lead, and then I'm gonna go ahead and tuck it through. And then kind of fold it around the back. There we go. Then I'm gonna take this lead, and I'm gonna do the same over onto this socket. Bring it around back. There we go. Solder it in place. I mean, pretty soon I'm going to switch from this chisel tip to my smaller tip so that I can, you know, work a little bit finer. So I'm going to go ahead and slide anyway this plate lead underneath everything and bring it back over to the socket to join these two sockets in series. Strip off a little bit of the lead, get it through. Get it around. So it makes kind of like a little butterfly. There we go. We could go ahead and solder that in. Clean it up, make sure it's all nice and tucked. Get that up underneath. There we go, that's nice. Now I'm going to do the same for the red here, which is the other side of the push-pull. Mark it with my finger where I want it cut. Save that piece. Strip a little bit of the wire. Fold it around back. There we go. And then I'm going to do the same. Grab this piece of red that was left over, get a little bit more off of it. And go ahead and bring it through. And come around. It's a little tight working in there. There we go. Sort of butterfly it around the back so it gets a good connection. Solder it in place. And then I can work that over to the next socket. Mark it with my finger. Solder it in place and clean it up. So that looks really good there. So now these two obviously are going over to the fuse holder, which is around this area. So I'm just gonna kind of put them like that. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do is we're going to do the screens. So the screens are, actually before we do the screens, let's do the grid resistors. So let me get some grid resistors. Should have had those out already. Got to go to the box of resistors. So there's some resistors for us. And then we're going to work on them and get them in place. So I got a little 16th inch drill bit here. All right, so I'm taking my resistor and I'm kind of gonna pigtail it around that drill bit. And then I end up with something like that. So that allows for a wire to kind of slide right through it and make a nice connection. So then I'm also going to put it in the right place, I hope. Wait, let me just count out this thing. All right, there we go. So I'm kind of folding it over and pinching it down before I solder it in place. And that always ensures that you get a nice connection. I know I keep saying that, but it's really important when you're building things to make sure that your connections are all perfect, or as close to perfect as you can get. Obviously, nothing is perfect, but you can definitely improve the reliability, the quality, the noise levels, the functionality of the unit if you pay attention to all this stuff. Now, it takes a lot longer to do things this way than if you were to just kind of like, you know, not worry about it too much. And you might have something that works. You might not. But I prefer this way for sure. I mean, that's why I like building these things for myself, or myself rather. So it's kind of like, you know, I mean, what do you think is going to perform better? I think if it's sort of observed by the same person over and over again who's building it, you tend to have a better product. Is that, let's say, practical? If you're talking about a lot of production, it definitely is not. But, you know, I'd rather just make stuff. It seems like I'm of the opinion now that I'd just rather make stuff as good as I can and sort of not chase quantity. And then each one of these things becomes, you know, a handcrafted sort of work as opposed to just like a consumer item. That looks good there. So now we can move on to the screens. Let me see how we're doing on time. I think we probably got, another 15 minutes maybe. The timer sort of got shut when I was doing the changeover. So we'll go probably another 10, 15 minutes, I think. I think 15. All right, so now back to the screens. All right, so the screens are basically a long series connection of wire to start with. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this here. And then at this point, this would be the wire that's gonna connect to the board. me get some more wire. Need some more yellow. Anyway, so, and then the one below it is going to be the one to go on to the next socket. So let's just get this one in, and then we can get this one in. This is kind of being a pain in the boudoir. There we go. I'm going to pinch this down like so. You go ahead and solder it in. All right, and then this is going to get brought over to the next socket. Hopefully we can get we could get through this part on the video today in the allotted time. Good. Now pinch it down. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to go over to the next socket. Now this socket, I'm going to have 3 leads. Sort of coming through it. So we got this one. Got that one. And I'm going to put in this one. So this one should go. And then this one. This is kind of a tight squeeze to get all 3 in there, but you can do it. Pinch them all down. And we'll solder it in place. Okay, so why 3? Because one is going to be going to the filter bank for this particular set, right? So this one's going to come across to the next socket. And then this one is going to come up to our filter banks. So I'm just going to cut a little excess there. Give myself a little bit more lead than I need, so I have no regrets in the future about that. All right, so the next part of the screens would be to put in our ceramic resistors for the screen resistors, and I'm using 1Ks right here. So this is sort of how I like to do things. I'll give it a little pinch in like that, and then I'll come from the inside of the socket outward, and I'll take it and bend them up and over, and then I'll bend this up and finish the loop like so. Then I'll go ahead and trim off the lead excess. Once again, make sure they're nice and connected. And then I can solder them in place. So this socket is basically almost finished with all the wiring that's going to come to it. We still have to do the heater leads. Now this is the heater leads we'll talk about a little bit, I guess, while we're winding up the video here. The heater leads, this is where I tend to differ from Marshall. So my thinking has always been that it's best to get those noisy things out of the way of everything else. So, and make each side, each leg of the heaters, right? Because there's two, which are center tapped. So for them to be hum free, they should have equal reference to ground as they go. So it's maybe a little anal, but wire length to me makes a difference. So I like to have both sides using as close to the same length of wire for the entire run as possible, as well as have the leads themselves twisted, right? Because there's the twisted pair, sort of hum rejection phenomenon, which we'll take advantage of. The equally length wires, right, which is balance, has to do with balancing, and then their location, which has to do with RF. So I'm going to use sort of like the Fender way of doing things, which is to bring them up in the air, twisted together, and kind of from one to the other, leave them above the chassis. Now, I've always found that Marshalls suffer from hum. Well, a lot of them do. And I've sort of figured out ways of eliminating that hum over the years of building these amplifiers and deviating a little bit from what they do to try to correct some of the issues that some of the Marshalls had. Now, some of the issues that they had, I think, were beneficial to the sound, so I leave those alone. But if there was no difference or no reason, I tend to go with something that makes a little bit more sense. So we'll be talking about that when we wire up the heaters, which will be coming up after this. But I don't think we're going to have enough time. To get that done, as we are fast approaching 40 some odd minutes, I believe, into this video. Yep. I should get a nurse in here, like to scrub in with me on these amp builds. Something like a Mrs. O'Wiggins, but a nurse, someone that can hand me stuff, and I could just say like, forceps, scalpel, soldering iron, wire strippers. Treat this like it's a surgery. It's similar. You got to be nice and neat and not kill your patient. You don't want to be doctor kill patient. Trust me. It's not a fun place to be. All right. So maybe we could do like one one heater, just because we teased it. All right, so this is how I sort of do the heaters, and then we'll call it a day. So I'm gonna use black and red. So I'm gonna take black first. All right, and I'm gonna get an approximation of how much black wire I need to do the run. And usually I find it's about the length of the chassis. So I'm gonna cut that and put my wire aside. Then I'm gonna get some red, and I'm gonna measure out the same amount of red as the black, right? So I'm gonna pull out the same amount and cut it off. All right. You know what? Let me move the chassis out of the way so you can sort of see what I'm doing here. Put that aside. All right, so we have a bunch of mess on the desk here. All right, so we have our red and black wires. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my drill. I'm going to load the wire into the drill. Hold it on one end. Now I've wound those up right into a twisted pair. And that's a phenomenon in physics, which allows that wires or things that are out of phase with each other, which the two legs of the heaters are out of phase with each other, they tend to cancel each other out. And that's the noise, so to speak. Or how the noise gets into things is through coupling with that AC, because heaters are AC, right? And AC is sort of a signal. They couple with that. Things that are looking, receivers inside the amplifier that are looking for signals and sensitive to RF will pick up these sort of radiation, the RF from these AC lines. But if they're sort of wound together in out of phase ways, it sort of acts like a cancellation. And a lot of noise, a lot of things like phone lines throughout history have relied on the concept of a twisted pair, balanced lines for low noise and low RF. So now I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to cut off some measured amounts. And then we can grab our chassis again, and I'll just show you how I do it. And then I think that will be about it for today. So I got our twisted lead. I'm sort of going to splay out the ends here on either side, about like so. And grab my strippers, and I'm going to go ahead and strip off an amount. Then I'm going to go ahead and place it. We forgot to trim a little bit of this resistor lead off. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and go from the inside to the outside. That one actually was a little clogged with some solder, so to speak. It had its hole soldered shut, so I had to go and heat that up. All right, so now I'm going to just kind of get it into position. There we go. I'm going to solder it in place. There we are. There it is. All right, so we have that. Now what I'm going to do is just bring it over to the next socket and use the lower set of holes on the solder tab of the socket. Now you have to switch out to the other solder tip, I think, at this point. So that's sort of how it's done, right? And then you would kind of see, I missed that because my solder tip is too big now. So it was really meant for the board, right? When we were building the board, it was, so you can transfer a lot of heat and you don't really have to be very precise in getting it around wires without burning everything. So anyway, so we sort of like go that way, right? And then we can take, what did I do with them? They were here a second ago. Okay, here they are. And get the next one out. Right, splay them out. Right, and then we just basically continue on down the line, one after the other. And there we have it. So now these leads are up above where all of the sort of sensitive input connections are for the tubes. And especially when you get into the preamp section, that really starts to pay off big. So that's how I like to do things. Some people may disagree, some people may agree, but that's sort of me, how I like to do it. So where are we at? Yeah, I think we're actually done. We're a little over an hour. So I'm just gonna stop here and then we'll pick up again and we'll continue finishing this build. So I wanted to thank you for watching and we'll see you next time.